After years of teaching business and entrepreneurship, I found that when guest speakers revealed the hardships and mistakes made throughout their professional and personal lives, it resonated with my students. That's when I thought, why not share these stories so that other entrepreneurs have access to the same insights for education and inspiration? I'm Cassmer Ward, and this is Influencing Entrepreneurs. On this episode, we talk with Henry Rock of City Startup Labs. Henry has been closing the entrepreneurial divide where often marginalized young black men and women, as well as returning citizens, are on the sidelines watching the startup parade go by. City Startup Labs creates a new class of entrepreneurs by providing a robust, accelerated, progressive, and disciplined approach to developing entrepreneurial talent. Henry's goal has not only been to provide business-ready skills for launching new ventures, but to also help improve the participants' ability to be better innovators, problem solvers, and leaders. What I'd like, our audience to talk about, or hear you talk about, is your involvement in the entrepreneurial community, but we're not born entrepreneurs, and we all have this backstory on how we started our first company or became a founder or took over a company. So if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure.
And your background and how that led to your involvement with City Startup Labs.
Right, well, great, thank you. So we started actually with this idea originally back in the mid-aughts, an idea for an entrepreneur's boot camp for the formerly incarcerated and former gang members. And I was looking to do this in Newark at the time of the incoming Cory Booker administration. He was becoming mayor of Newark at the time. They had a lot on their plate, and this was not one of them. Put that idea on the shelf, dusted it off a few years later when then Mayor Bloomberg of New York launched the Young Men's Initiative, which was targeting young men of color ages 14 to 24 around the areas of education, criminal justice, and employment. And I felt that a piece of that puzzle that was missing was entrepreneurship and self-employment, especially if you have had any criminal background. It's very difficult to get the employment that you want, have a living wage, and that sort of thing. So, self-employment seemed to be an important possibility. And as fate would have it, that particular administration entrepreneurship was not a part of their bailiwick. As fate would have it, I was coming to Charlotte, and I had reached out to the National Urban League about the idea of launching this as a pilot here in Charlotte, and then potentially rolling this out to other markets around the country where they had affiliates. So the president and CEO of this chapter of the Urban League at the time really saw the value in us doing this as a pilot. And the focus was on young black men at the time. It was really black male millennials, so 18 to 35-year-olds. And so we did a pilot with them for a couple of years.
And in what year is this?
Well, we kicked things off in 2014. Right. We had received a grant from the Rockefeller Foundation to actually launch our pilot. That was as a result of actually having done a TED Talk around this topic. So then after a couple of years of doing this pilot with the Urban League, decided to affiliate with Venture Prize, which is located at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. So we've been affiliated with them for the last few years. There's some real advantages for doing that because of our proximity and relationship, by extension, if you will, to the university and some of their resources and so forth.
Where did you start your career, and how did you obviously built a successful toolbox of skills. So if you don't mind sharing a little bit about your background.
I actually come from a long line of folks that have thought and as well as put some effort into being focused on how we could uplift the race. That was, in fact, that was a theme that started, back in the 1800s. How do you uplift the race post-slavery? So A lot of my familial background is in Black history, Negro history at the time. A lot of my familial background sort of intersects Black history in some amazing ways. So I had that as a foundation. When I was coming up, it was really on the heels of the civil rights movement. I was pretty active in the Black Power movement at the time. A lot of that really was formative for me. I got into media as a profession. I didn't complete college, believe it or not, but I decided that I was going to take this track into media through starting it off at the proverbial mailroom. I had a career in television for a period and then went to work in Black media, which synced up nicely with my sensibilities. And I worked for some amazing Black media entrepreneurs really at the height of, or the heyday of Black media. So, folks like John Johnson, who was the publisher of Jet and Ebony magazine in Chicago. Reagan Henry was a person that we really don't hear much of, who was the owner of probably the largest number of TV and radio stations around the country as a Black man, the National Black Network, and on and on. I mean, I could go on about the folks that I worked with, who again were amazing entrepreneurs and mentors to me, and not just in terms of being their employee, but also really being having their tutelage as well. Sort of consistent with that was selling advertising to Black businesses and also to advertising agencies that were owned and operated by Black folks. I threw my hat into the entrepreneurial ring a couple of times with media efforts that crashed and burned. I thought that it would be a good idea to bring a lot of this experience that was both familial and professional to bear on behalf of young folks that oftentimes had exposed to this generational divide. So I'm a boomer and I'm dealing with millennials, and one of the things that I felt was important is to bridge that to bridge that gap.
Was there a trigger, or was there some major life point that affected you to say, okay, now is the right time and now is the right opportunity?
I'm actually of retirement age, so I could be doing other things in this time, and chose to deal with this as opposed to boning up on my golf game, which I don't have. Right? There really wasn't anything in the an intersection professionally that said, okay, well, ditch the job and go do this. However, all throughout my career, I've been thinking about throwing my hat into the ring, as I said earlier, with an idea or two and collaborating with other folks around things. So, that entrepreneurial instinct was there. I think it exists for most of us.
How do you differ how you go to grow your member base versus how you're out promoting the organization as a whole to say, okay, this is an organization that's going to give back to the community, and promoting your mission? And how do you get buy-in on both the member side and the sponsor side?
Well, sometimes I wonder whether or not I do it well, to be honest with you. It's always been a challenge to balance both of those things and to do them, reasonably well. We typically have a small cohort that we deal with, so it's about 25 participants at a time. The program runs, it used to run actually up to 9 months. So there was 4 modules, 3 of which are what I would call the accelerator portion of it. And then the 4th module is really more of the incubation. So you take what you've learned over that first 3-month period and then begin to apply that in the form of a go-to-market strategy or minimal viable product or prototype and that sort of thing. And so we did have 6 months of incubation, and now we've pared that down to 3. It's always been a challenge to really try to get a good caliber of folk in the program, because you really want to, as you were alluding to, you want to be able to service the needs of the funders who are looking for results and outcomes and outputs and that sort of thing.
Right.
On one hand, but then you also want to make sure that you're as open as possible to those folks that are really enthusiastic about becoming entrepreneurs. And how do you balance that? It's been a tough balancing act to convince funders who are, and we get much of our funding actually through foundations and the like. There's a smattering that comes from private donations and that sort of thing. It's been a challenge to get funders to see the value of this, but now we've got, this is our 5th cohort that will be starting, so we have some credible history, and we can speak to some evidence that shows that this has been efficacious to the folks that have gone through the program. Funders are maybe a little more keen about what it is that we're doing. On the other hand, it's to use this term again, a challenge to get good qualified folk to sign up and vet them and all of that to become participants, and then to want to continue to give back or to sort of pay it forward to the next class that comes along.
Looking for sponsors and donors, sometimes they don't understand that. So you're selling, this is what our mission is. It'll make the world a better place. It'll make us all feel better at the end of the day for participating and being a part of it. But sometimes that unfortunately falls on deaf ears. So obviously, going into your 5th cohort, there's been success for this, but there's no doubt, and a lot of times we don't talk about all the doors that were shut in our face along the way, and we didn't realize we were not doing or saying the right thing. So I was going to say, and you don't have to be extremely specific, but who or how did that first win come along to where the first sponsor, where they got it and you said, I want this feeling, I want this success over and over again?
The Rockefeller Foundation had, there was a woman that was running a portion of the fund where there was discretionary income or discretionary funds that she could allocate. And a woman that was working with her happened to have seen the TED Talk that I'd done, and they were, I guess impressed enough to say, hey, listen, this is an organization that we would like to get behind. And at that point, we hadn't launched really. So it was on the basis of that address that I gave that they decided to fund us. This is the first time that the Rockefeller Foundation has done anything, nor since, here in Charlotte. And so that was a bit of a feather in the cap. Right? It was a good feeling around that. And then there were other funders, Knight Foundation, Wells Fargo, that kind of fell in line thereafter, and I felt that I was on a nice little roll there. Right? And only to find out that you cannot take your pedal off foot off the pedal. Yeah. You say pedal to the metal, right? So I didn't pedal to the metal. Some of that had to do with, actually having to do the work, right. The sort of the day-to-day work, right. And fundraising is a job unto itself. So, but it was cautionary. To say that when you have that first few clients, don't let up at all. You want to I used to run track, and we always talk about running through the tape.
Right.
Because there are some people that, get to the tape, right, and somebody beats them because they ran through the tape. So it's important to continue to run through the tape.
So with that, let's talk about some of the challenges you face along the way, because especially with fundraising and building that case, you learn a level of humility along the way when you're out, whether it's in sponsors, members, or even trying to raise capital for a startup company. You learn no, you get asked questions that it's easy to start self-doubting yourself, maybe even to the point where you were like, am I doing the right thing, or is it time to just time to close up shop?
All right. Well, I've actually had that feeling recently in dealing with millennials, to be honest with you. There's a sense of entitlement and so forth that I just don't quite get, and I've been working with them for a while, but it still, kind of boggles the mind. I tend not to dwell too long on in the as Seth Godin would say, in the dip, right? I really I don't get too high, I don't get too low. We try to maintain some sort of even keelness. The challenges are things that I expect. Having been in sales, for 20 years.
Which kind of toughens your skin a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. There's a fella that is a colleague that says he takes no as vitamins.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great way to look at it. So there's that, but then we launched a new initiative dealing with the formerly incarcerated. And there are challenges that are associated with dealing with that population, one that we never dealt with before. And how do you help them to navigate their personal issues and all of that? And one of the ways we actually help our cohorts is through mentorship and coaching, business coaching, but also mentorship that helps them to deal with when life gets in the way.
As you're going into your fifth cohort, obviously, with the challenges that come to setting up, your organization, what is the success? Maybe that, while there's no doubt that you're already successful.
At the end of the day, it's really about developing this entrepreneurial talent. One of the things that I think is absolutely important, and what in a lot of cases distinguishes us from other accelerator programs and the like, is that we do focus a lot on who folks are and what's going on in their belly and what's going on in their heart and what's going on in their mind. You can get entrepreneurial training or education easily nowadays. It's very accessible. But some of this other stuff about mindset and critical thinking and understanding who you are and why you are where you are and all of that, while that for the participants oftentimes seems to be warm and fuzzy stuff, we really want to get to that, because that is foundational for building business acumen. So at the end of the day, it's really about, have we developed entrepreneurial talent such that they can either launch the next whatever, or actually be better employees in the companies that they're working for, should they choose not to hang a shingle. So our mission is really about how we develop the person, and the success that comes out of that in terms of the next whatever is really kind of icing on the top as far as I'm concerned.
Just a couple points I wanted to circle back to. So being a baby boomer, dealing with the millennial generation, is a challenge that's happening throughout every industry right now. And while that even can seem like a barrier, or days you're like, let's call it a day, what are some of the breakthroughs you're making in order to make that connection? Because really what you're looking for is, how do we convey these concepts and message to a generation that seems extremely foreign to everything we practice?
Well, one of the things is that I get a lot of, there's a lot of gratification that comes from working with them, working with young folks, right? Just as it is with returning citizens. However, I realized that in order for me to really scale this business and to get it to a place where we have the capacity that I envisioned for it, I'm going to have to remove myself from some of that hands-on facilitation. Oftentimes people equate City Startup Labs to me, the personality, and not, City Startup Labs is unto itself an entity that is doing these things, right? That is part of our mission. So what I like to do is to really be able to sort of extricate myself from that day-to-day activity working with these young folks, even though I love doing it, and really focus more on building capacity and building this business. And that's going to take just a shift in focus for me. But in the meantime, I'm enjoying, even though I said what I said earlier about that may have been a hill too high to climb, I still really relish working with these folks. And what I get from them is a sense of their appreciation for having gone through this.
No, and even as you said, even though it becomes frustrating and you want to scream at the wall some days, it's been my experience the things that frustrate you the most are the reason you keep coming back day after day. So,
in fact, I don't just scream at the wall; I scream at them too sometimes. Because they oftentimes deserve a swift kick in the behind and get them out of their complacency.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for participating. It's stories like this that hopefully all those listening will learn a little something and hopefully inspire them to reach out and do a little more too. Thank you.
Thank you.